Okay, I've been teaching navigation probably longer than I've been teaching kayaking, and I am comfortable working on any kind of map, though I will say sectionals for flying aircraft are about the craziest maps I've ever worked with. They are not easy. But today I want to talk about GPS. I love GPS. I love using it in conjunction with map and compass, but here are some ways to use GPS correctly as opposed to the way people think they should use GPS. Let's go. So these are the three most common types of GPS. Really, the most common is our phones, and we bring them with us everywhere and use them as GPSs. Sometimes that's a good idea, sometimes it's a really bad idea. This next most common are watches. I wear a GPS watch every day, but I rarely actually use the GPS. And I'll explain why in a little bit. The least most common used to be the most common. The least most common used GPS are handheld GPSs, and these have gone out of vogue because of phones. But they all have good uses and all excel at different things. The thing that you have to understand about GPS is that, weak old water, that's no good, is that all that it's really doing is giving you the ability to put an electronic pin into a map and then knowing precisely where that pin is in relation to you. So essentially what I'm saying is, once you pick a spot, which on a GPS we call a waypoint, I like to think of it as an electronic pin in a map. Once we pick that spot, the GPS can tell us its distance and its direction. And that's really all that it's doing. It adds in a bunch of other things, but in essence, that is all that it's doing. Distance and direction to one spot. We get lots of other things out of the GPS besides distance and direction to that known spot. We get speed, we get distance, things like that. But if we have that one little piece of information, distance and direction to a known spot, we're not lost. That's really all we need to know. And that's primarily how I use it in conjunction with a map and a compass. Is I'll make a waypoint, electronic pin in a map, at my starting point or at the trailhead or where the car is parked, and I may never make another waypoint after that. But if at any point I'm not sure where I am, I can turn it on, tell it to give me a distance and a direction to that point, and that will help me sort of reverse it. And if I know the distance and the direction, I can plot that on a map, and that'll tell me exactly where I am. And I'll frequently do that when I'm hiking. And I will say, so for instance, when I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail, I made a waypoint at the trailhead where we started. And then when we stopped hiking, all I needed to know was the distance to that waypoint. I knew I was still on the Appalachian Trail, but if I measured in a straight line with a piece of string where that distance crossed the trail, that's where I was standing. Super easy navigation, very easy to do. And by doing it like that, I don't have to leave my GPS on all the time. So I'm saving battery. My battery will last through an entire trip instead of having to have a battery on or a GPS on running through battery all day, every day. Frequently I deal with people who are like, I want my GPS running all day so I can see everywhere that I've hiked or everywhere that I've ridden. And you really don't need to do that. You can if you want to, but you're going to be using up tons of power, which means carrying batteries and figuring out some way to charge those batteries. It's much simpler to just make waypoints as you go along. So I'll make a waypoint at the trailhead, and then I generally make waypoints wherever I camp. So if I get lost, I can just navigate my way back to that last known point, whatever that may be. There are a couple times when I leave my GPS on for an extended period of time. One of them is doing open water crossings in the kayak. Frequently, I will start a crossing, make a waypoint at the start of that open water crossing, maybe 2, 3, 4 miles, maybe longer. I'll make a waypoint right there at the start and then tell the GPS to navigate its way back to that point. Then as I paddle away from it, it's telling me how far I have come and how fast I'm going. What I would really like to do is to be able to have the GPS track a distance to 2 points so that I can see how far I've come and how far I have to go to the other side of the crossing. I have yet to see a handheld GPS that'll do that, but what you can do is if you've got 2 people in the group with GPSs, each of you can be running a waypoint, one where you came from, one where you're going to. So it's just a quick communication to that person, hey, are we closer to the shore on the side we're going to, or are we closer to go back in case there's a problem? I always want to know in an open water crossing which is closer, the where I'm going or where I came from. Another time that I want my GPS on all the time is mountain biking, primarily because I'm using my mountain bike for fitness, and so I want to keep track of that. And in that situation, I'm using my phone and I'm using an app like Strava or something like that to keep track of how far I've gone, how fast I've gone, things like that, mainly because it's activity tracking. In general, I'm not a fan of using your phone as a GPS. When I'm paddling or when I'm backpacking, my phone goes in a waterproof, crush-proof case in the bottom of my backpack or in a dry bag, powered off. In part because I don't want to be getting phone calls and text messages and emails while I'm outside doing something fun. But the other part of it is that if something bad should happen and I should need a phone, I want to make sure that it works and I want to make sure that it's fully charged. So that's sort of my deal. The other deal is that a handheld GPS like this is way more durable than this even in a case. Junk text message. Even way more durable than this even in a case. And I'll frequently tell people in navigation classes to hold their phone out while I'm holding their GPS, and I'll say, okay, do what I'm doing, and I'll drop this onto the ground. And I have yet to find someone that trusts their case enough to drop it onto the ground. Also, this is easier to keep charged because I can just throw AA's into it, whereas this needs to be charged via USB. So I'm a big fan of these, even though a lot of people are not using them anymore. The last GPS that I use is my watch, and honestly, I don't use the GPS function in it that frequently. I will sometimes use it while I'm mountain biking and just have it sync to the Garmin Connect app on my phone when I want that data. I'll sometimes use it when I run. I will occasionally use it to make a waypoint at the start of a hike, but that's generally just when I don't want to deal with my handheld GPS for whatever reason. Primarily, I use this watch as an ABC watch, which is altimeter, barometer, compass. I use it to watch the weather. I use it for quick navigation stuff with the compass, and I use it for getting alerts and things like that. So I'm not really using it as a GPS all that much because the GPS destroys the battery in here. The battery lasts about, they say 8 hours, I say 6 hours, and then I've got to recharge it, which is just a nightmare. There is one more thing that I don't do with GPS, well, usually don't do. There are a couple of occasions where I have, that a lot of people think you should do with the GPS, and that is loading maps on your handheld or on your watch. I think that's a really bad idea with a couple of caveats. The reason it's a bad idea is I don't want anyone walking through the woods staring down at a map that is 2 inches by 1.5 inches, or even worse, 1.5 inches around. That's just like no way to live. GPS works great in conjunction with a paper map and a real compass. You'll still have those skills for when your battery dies, things like that. But loading maps on a GPS is usually not a great idea. I never use the moving map on this GPS, and I do use the rudimentary one on here sometimes when I'm paddling, but it's pretty rare. Usually I just want that speed, distance, and distance to a point information. The few times that I have loaded maps onto a GPS are these. I loaded onto this handheld the street maps for where I live, because for about 2 years I used it as a bike computer on my commute to work. So I used to ride my bike to work, and I would use, it was just fun to see where streets were and roads were and things like that, and sometimes I would take different routes, and it was nice to have that map. The only other time that I have loaded maps onto my GPS is when I did the Inside Passage. I had multiple backups for maps, and one of the things that I did was I loaded all of the maps onto this handheld, they're still on there, for the entire coast, just as an emergency backup. And we did, in fact, at one point change our route, and we didn't have maps of that section. And so it was nice to have it as a backup on here. We did actually use it in a rudimentary sense. We knew we were paddling north, keep the coast on your right, everything is good. But those are the only 2 times that I load maps on my GPSs. In general, I don't think you need them. So those are the 3 ways, the 3 GPSs that I use and the ways that I use them. If you have questions about how I use GPS that I haven't covered, leave a comment down below. If this content worked out well for you, hit like, hit subscribe. You can also support me with coffee. There's a link down below to give me $4 for coffee, or as much as you want, or whiskey. Frankly, I use the money for whiskey. But those are ways that you can support me. My books are on Amazon, and I'll see you outside.